Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to speak to you students from the School of Investment and Finance. I know that you are very busy people and that you hope to learn things which make you more successful. I wish you luck in this, and I hope my 2 lectures will help you with this. My name is Adrian Furnham. I am a professor of psychology at London University, which was founded in 1827. I am a business psychologist and interested in a lot of the issues I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about leadership and money and motivation. And I'm first going to talk about the topic of leadership. There are many, many books on this topic. There are 100,000 books in English just on the topic of leadership. This obviously means that people are very interested in this topic. They believe, quite rightly, that leaders make a difference, that organizations and countries and companies succeed or fail by the quality of their leaders. I'm going to talk about, at the end of this lecture, a new topic in this area, and that is the topic of leadership failure and derailment. My latest book is on why leaders fail, not why leaders succeed. But let us begin by discussing the various areas that have been researched by psychologists on leadership. So, slide 1. There are 6 major areas that people have researched on the topic of leadership. The first is position power. That is the power of the leader in an organization. This is usually related to how tall or flat organizations are, how many levels they have. So traditionally in, for instance, an army, all armies are based on one simple principle, and the principle is called span of control. It means that one leader is always in charge of about 6 or 7 or 8 other leaders, other people. So for instance, a corporal will be in charge of 6 or 7 privates, and a sergeant in charge of 6 or 7 corporals, and a lieutenant in charge of 6 or 7 sergeants, etc. So the whole organization is based on a very simple idea, and the idea is one leader cannot control or lead more than a reasonably small number of people. Now there are other organizations which are very flat organizations, where one leader controls many, many others. So for instance, if you think of the Roman Catholic Church, and possibly also of the Russian Orthodox Church, there will be one leader, maybe an archbishop or the Constantinople, who will have many, many, many people underneath him who he leads. Many organizations are tall organizations who have this idea of a limited span of control. At the university I come from, it's a very flat organization. Leaders in tall organizations, like the military, have a different type of power. They have very direct power. They show their power. They wear rank on their shoulders to indicate their power. Their pay, their offices, everything is dependent on their rank in the organization. And so this has a very big impact on the style of leadership. I'm not going to talk more about that topic, but it is a very important one, how leaders exercise their power, whether it is by rank and status, or by knowledge, or by charisma. It is an important topic. The second topic you can see on the slide is the nature of the leaders themselves, their personality, their ability, their values. I am going to talk a lot about this topic. Third, there is the topic not of the leaders, but of those who they lead. That is the led. Can the same leader lead in different organizations? Can a military leader be successful in business? Or can a business leader move from one sector to another successfully? Has there not got to be a fit or a match between the leader and the led? Would it be possible that an American political leader could lead the Russians, or a British political leader lead the Americans? Some people think that is impossible, that we have to think about leadership not only in terms of the individual leader, but in terms of those who he leads. Slide 2. As you can see from slide 2, the fourth topic is on the influence process. That is, how leaders attempt to influence the people who they lead, how they persuade them. A successful leader has a task of bringing together a team or a group and motivating them to achieve a task. And the question for that topic is the task and how he or she influences the group. The fifth topic is on the situation. And what that means is this: there are times of war and times of peace, times of economic expansion and economic contraction. Some leaders do very well in times of war, but not in times of peace. Some do very well when things are expanding, but not when things are contracting. In this country, we think of our greatest leader, politically at any rate, as Sir Winston Churchill, who was our war leader. He was very successful and we owe him a great debt. And yet the British public in 1945 did not re-elect him and his party. So we saw him as a great leader for war, but not as a great leader for peace. And so the question becomes not about the characteristics inside the leader, but the situation in which he or she leads. We see in business some leaders are very good in crises, others are very, very good in stable times. And we have to take into consideration the situation when talking about leadership. The sixth topic is the emergence or election of leaders. How do we get a business leader? How do people climb the ladder? How do countries have or elect their leaders? Not all of them elect their leaders democratically. How is it that talented people rise up in the organization? How do they emerge as successful? And what plans does an organization have of finding and nurturing their particular leaders? So these are the 6 topics that people research in this area. And I want to look at this historically. So let us look at slide 3 now. Slide 3 shows the history of psychological thinking about leadership from a psychological perspective. And it says, first of all, the trait approach, sometimes called the great man or great person theory. And until 1945, psychologists and sociologists and business people, and indeed politicians, all believed that you need to look at the special characteristics of leaders, their traits, their personality, something inside of them, and that this predicted how successful they would be as leaders. Many books have been written on the personality of such things as the American presidents, or indeed the personality of great pop stars, or the personality of great prime ministers, or of course the personality of great leaders. And here the attempt is to try and find the special, unique personality characteristics that lead people to become specifically excellent and successful leaders, because that then teaches us what to look for, what to select for. I shall say in a few minutes why this approach failed and why it has started again to be of great interest. After this, in the 1940s and 50s in America, people said it was not about the characteristics of leaders, but it was their style. This is called the behavioral approach. It's not what people are, but it is what they do. Some leaders are democratic. Other leaders are autocratic. Some are hands-on, some are hands-off. And what the psychologists tried to do was to describe a limited number of particular styles. So they would say, for instance, that one leader had a very democratic style. He liked talking to people, asking for their opinions, bouncing ideas off of them, whereas others had a very different style. And the best way to think about leaders is about their style, not their personality. And then in the 1960s were a very dramatic time in the West because people rejected ideas about genetics and about personality. And they said it all depends on the situation in which people find themselves, that it had nothing to do with the characteristics of leaders or even their style, but it had to do with the situation they found themselves in. Some businesses are successful because they've got a wonderful product. Some businesses are successful because they have no competitors. Some businesses are successful because they innovate very quickly. And it doesn't really matter a great deal about the leader. It's all got to do with the situation they find themselves in. And so for nearly 10 years or 20 years, the researchers became interested in this particular topic of the situation. What particular situations are effective for which particular leaders? And then in 1978, an American historian wrote a book in which he made an important distinction. And the distinction was between what he called transformational leaders and transactional leaders. Sometimes this is a discussion about managers versus leaders. Transformational leaders transform, change, make a big difference to organizations. They have a vision, they have charisma, they move people forward. Others simply manage very successfully. And with this idea in the 1970s and the 1980s, people became very interested in the concept of charismatic leadership. Some leaders are obviously very charismatic. If you speak to anybody who has met ex-President Clinton, they will say to you immediately that this man has tremendous charisma. This is an old idea, charisma. It's a unique gift, a gift of enthusiasm and vision and so forth. And so in the 1980s, people became particularly interested in these ideas about transformational, about charismatic leaders and how they could change situations. Around the same time, various other new ideas came about with regard to leadership. People talked about the servant leader, the leader who served his or her people, often like religious leaders and some political leaders. They talked about authentic leadership, leadership that has to do with ethics and values. We know in some organizations where there is a great deal of corruption that some leaders who are honest to a ethical code succeed better. And so from the 1980s, there was an interest in these particular characteristics: charisma, authenticity. So for 100 years, we have 4 phases. The trait approach, looking at the characteristics inside people. The behavioral approach, looking at how people behave. The situation, looking at how leaders lead in particular situations.